Hi. So for today's class, we read The Grand Inquisitor, which is from the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoyevsky. I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong. I have a very hard time pronouncing these names. Um, but kind of wanted to talk about some of the themes in this piece. It's really interesting because he has such an incredibly pessimistic view of modernity, which kind of reminded me of Shelley, that there is this kind of idea that humanity is doomed by our own devices, and that also has a similar vein to the Goethe piece that we read as well. Um, and then there's these three powers he talks about: miracle, mystery, and authority, and that those are kind of the three things that we need to be happy. And those don't include free will. In fact, the freedom of choice and free will makes people unhappy. And this idea that we should value happiness over free will, that's something we certainly don't see today. And something that kind of reminds me of the way Berman talked about the speed of capitalism, and how unhappy we all are. And so I kind of want to start with this idea of mystery. For Dostoevsky, or at least for his characters, there's something incredibly irresistible about religion. There's this pull that if you defy it, you are very clearly defying that pull. It's irresistible. It is some way almost natural. And when Jesus comes down to earth in this kind of 15th century poem, people are drawn to the presence of Jesus. They flock to him. And I should mention as well that I did do a little bit of research on this piece because I had trouble understanding it. So I didn't just completely understand it the first time I went through it. And so there's this quote on page 6 where he says, freedom, free thought, and science will lead them into such straits and will bring them face to face with such marvels and insoluble mysteries. Insoluble mysteries, that's such an interesting phrase. That some of them, the fierce and rebellious, will destroy themselves. Others, rebellious but weak, will destroy one another, while the rest, weak and unhappy, will crawl fawning to our feet and whine to us, "Yes, you were right. You alone possess his mystery, and we come back to you. Save us from ourselves." I think this is interesting because there's this idea that there is mystery, that free thought, when combined with mystery and marvels, still creates unhappiness because you don't have the authority to save yourself in some sense. Like, you don't have the authority that God has to save you from yourself. You need someone above you to save you. But there's this quality of mystery, like this quality hearkening back to some time or some miracle that happened, that there's this mystery you can't necessarily explain, but that you know that you want. And that kind of reminds me of Shelley when she talks about when Frankenstein has this secret that he won't reveal because it would be too destructive to humanity. And so he keeps that to himself, and that mystery is what ends up destroying humanity. And I wonder if it's because because he is supposed to be an authority and doesn't end up being an authority over his creation. If that makes sense. I'm sorry if I'm spiraling a little bit. And then there's this idea of authority, which kind of starts with the question, why does he set his poem in the 1500s? I mean, it's just such an odd, when I first read it, it just seemed so odd that this was the time period he set it in. But the more I think about it, and, obviously the title of the poem, The Grand Inquisitor, it makes sense because this was a time during the Inquisition in Seville in Spain where the courts are having the power to punish people. It's either you convert to Christianity or you die. There is no other option. There is no free will or free thought. And he makes this very clear, saying that the church is very corrupt. When he introduces the Grand Inquisitor, he says he is not dressed in his gorgeous cardinal robes as he was the day before when he was burning the enemies of the Roman Church. So even if this church has authority, it doesn't have to be uncorrupted. The Grand Inquisitor still has, he still has corruption, but the important part here is that he also doesn't believe in free will. He's acting on that. And he says this quote, the Grand Inquisitor: "For the first time it has become possible to think of the happiness of men. Man was created a rebel, and how can rebels be happy?" So that idea and also the theme of rebellions is interesting given Dostoyevsky's own time period he's living in, and given the Russian landscape he's writing about. And this also harkens back to, setting it in the 1500s, harkens back to this some time of before, where all of mankind was absorbed by God, all of mankind was happy, and now free will has been given to people, and that is what is making them unhappy. So I'm not necessarily sure if Dostoyevsky means to add that in there, that this idea, but it kind of reminds me of even Goethe, like harkening back to this romantic past, this small world life where there aren't that many choices necessarily. And you can't change your position of life, just like Gretchen can't necessarily move into a modern frame. And then there's this idea of miracles, which is really interesting because essentially what a miracle does is prove the presence of something, which is kind of a modernist way of thinking about religion. I mean, obviously miracles have been happening for centuries, and people oftentimes use them to prove the presence of God or to prove the presence of something. But it's interesting how that idea of proving something has also kind of been co-opted by the modernist movement. And then there's this idea that man or mankind or humankind is waiting for this miracle. And there's a quote: "So as long as man remains free, he strives for nothing so incessantly and so painfully as to find someone to worship." So whether it be God or idols or people or ideas, mankind is constantly looking for something to worship. And that maybe that doesn't necessarily exist in modernism, and that's why we're so unhappy. And so that kind of asks the question, can there be miracles in modernity? Or has modernity corrupted miracles? Because he says that, I think Ivan says that that modernists can't stand anything fantastic, or that modernity can't stand anything fantastic, which is a really interesting idea. I mean, we see that a lot today with, kind of chastising people for being religious, or for not believing in like the miracles of science and instead believing in other types of miracles, that this idea of fantasy is so removed from our life that we can't connect the two anymore. And it also kind of makes me wonder, is that kiss between Christ and the Grand Inquisitor, and then between Ivan and Alyosha, I think is how you pronounce it, is that kiss a miracle too? Because it's a show of compassion, and it's so unexpected in both cases. And so is that a kind of miracle that you need to believe in humanity? Can humanity be something that man believes in? Just questions I'm thinking about. And then all of this kind of begs the question, like, where does free will come from? Because the way that the Grand Inquisitor is describing it, it seems like free will is a gift, kind of, that Christ has given to people by going through these 3 trials, and proving that you can have free will, and you can make choices that aren't in your best interest. And so it seems like the cardinal is just very bitter, because this free will has been given to him, but there's a choice of free will there, but he knows that it makes people unhappy. And then Alyosha also asks, who are the keepers of these mystery who have taken some curse upon themselves for the happiness of mankind? And so that's interesting as well, because there's this idea that there's people that know this mystery and can and guard this mystery, and that maybe this mystery is a belief in God, but maybe also it's like not a belief in God. Like maybe the mystery is that these religious people who believe in God, like the cardinal, actually don't believe in God, and they're exerting their own free will in order to have people fall under their authority. So there's a lot of themes here, and I'm sorry if this sounded very rambly. I'm just kind of going through questions that I thought about with this reading, but I can't wait to hear what other people have to say in class. Thank you.